I think maybe we're going to get some stools or chairs come. Here they come. Here comes some. Well, the table. The table's coming. There's all sorts of issues that we can address here. That from what makes journalism. I mean, is Richard's infrared photography? Is that journalism? Can it count as journalism? To advocacy, the line between journalism and advocacy, to new methods of getting photography, getting a work of substance out, and funding questions, finding new sources of support, whether it's educational foundations in the case of David Rochkind's work, or other sources of funding that we might get. There's a lot of expertise in this room. I know there are photography students here, photojournalism students. There are a lot of people who are in town for Photo Week, and I want to go immediately to questions if we can, and there may be issues, some of these issues that the photographers on stage will want to address, that points made by others in their presentations, and I want to give you all an opportunity to do that. But first we're going to pass the mics around, is that right? Okay. We have mics in the center here, and I'm not sure, do we have one on the side, or they're just we have one in the center. Questions? Questions? If you all have questions, come toward the center. I see one from our colleague Jake Naughton.
Just a question to kick it off. This can go to any of you guys. A lot of you have worked on projects for years and years. And what drives you during that long period? Why continue spending so much time on work you have no guarantee will get published or distributed to an audience? Why? Is, I guess,
Keep making me go first. So. Well, for me personally, I think that it's been a lot more rewarding. For one, you stay with one project and the same people, you really get to know them. If you are running around all over the place, for example, I stayed just in Ciudad Juarez to do a story that I could worked in the entire country of Mexico, or even gone farther down into South America to work on it. I felt like, for me, I could create a more intimate project, and my body of work would be more representative of what was happening if I stuck with it. I mean, of course, it drives you crazy, but it's worth it.
First of all, something that, if I choose a story, it's something I'm exceedingly passionate about. And I also feel like it's an opportunity to tell a story that hasn't been told before, and I feel that it's important to get the news out. And there's a cause and effect feeling. It's journalism, yes, but if you lay out the story, you feel like at least someone new has their story told.
Hello? Yes? Is that on? Oh. I also think that, all of us are interested in adding something else to the conversation about whatever it is that we're taking pictures of. And, we all have our own personal styles and points of view and the ways that we author the stories. But if we don't go for a long period of time, then I don't know if we necessarily offer a lot more than any other photographer who's there. If we go for a week and there's 60 other photographers there, then potentially we're just repeating what other people are doing. Granted, we're taking different pictures and hopefully we have a different point of view. But to do, I think, what all of us are interested in doing, it really requires a longer period of time.
I think for me, one of the things I'm interested in is watching people change, people transform. So some days, all of you out here, we could all be in crises in a certain level. How are you growing through that? So it takes a period of time to actually witness somebody, maybe empowering themselves through what would be a dramatic or a very difficult period, and that takes time.
And I think most photographers and photojournalists get into this work because they believe in something. They're passionate about something. As David said, they feel they have a voice to add to the conversation. And I think there are many other careers we could have chosen to go into, but you choose to be a photojournalist and work on these issues, whether they're health issues, social issues, or environmental issues, because you believe in something and you believe that you can add to the dialogue that already exists?
For me, it's a little bit different because it's much more of an inward journey. I feel I'm not dealing with mass media communication. I'm really actually just making the pictures for myself. And so I would say that the longer you work in a place or commit to a place and commit to a story, the more you get sucked in, the more fascinating it gets. And it's really, for me, it's just a sort of thickening of the imagination and not really about some sort of evangelism or some sort of... I try very hard to keep my work non-didactic and open-ended because I really don't know anything, really, to be honest.
And I just want to say that the converse of that is that sometimes the longer you work on it, the more you realize how much you don't know, and the longer you have to keep working on it, which is my case. So, you know, it just gets so complex and so nuanced that you have to spend time to really cover those things. If you're going to do it that way, then you have to do it. So.
Question here.
Yes. First of all, thank you all so much for coming and presenting. I thought all of your work was amazing. David, I really, actually, sorry, Richard, sorry. Richard, I really liked your approach to your photography, to tell your story in an artistic way. You all at some point touched on the challenges between taking your photo, but then also how you artistically represented it, because you're all artists. You're all such wonderful visual artists. And I was really interested in hearing about your, how you cope with perhaps the struggles of presenting something in a real way versus kind of an artistic way. I don't know if all of you have struggled with that before. Richard, I know you really approach your photography with that artistic eye. And also I'm kind of interested to see if this is, I know you said you weren't appealing to mass media, but your pictures are very, very relevant to media and journalism and telling stories. And so that, I know this is kind of going all over the place, but I guess my main points are, my main questions are, what are your struggles between the artistic versus the real of your photos, and then do you see a new realm of journalism for all of you in going into this, taking beyond just the basic picture and telling more of a story? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess the big struggle for me is just to be honest with myself. And that's the hardest struggle in life, really. I really don't know about journalism, but I guess with that infra project, photography is at a certain moment, a sort of shifting threshold, and that film that I was using was discontinued the month before that I bought the stock, and so it addresses certain issues regarding where we're at in photography, particularly.
I think Richard touched on in his talk this idea of pictures of conflict or of death can be beautiful. And for me, I respond to pictures that I want to look at, and that's beautiful pictures. Whatever the content is and whatever the exact moment is, I'm trying to take pictures that are really going to engage people and have access points and that people are going to be able to look at for more than 5 or 10 seconds and actually want to look at, because I think that's how they're going to start thinking more about the issues and engage with the issues and start learning more, not just about that particular picture, but the broader themes that it presents.
I should have said earlier that there's some tweeting going on about this event, and Maura Youngman, our social media coordinator, that is doing it under hashtag Beyond Witness. So if anybody is tweeting out there, if you could use that will be part of the conversation. A question here.
Yeah, first of all, I agree. You were all incredible, and the amount of time you spend with your work really shows to us in such a short period of time. What I was really interested in is the way you first relate to your subjects. You can tell that you've spent a lot of time and they feel comfortable with you and open up to you, but how do you initially, especially like Miss Sinclair, you're photographing these secret weddings, how do you make that first step, and how do you explain what you're trying to do and what you're trying to relate to us here to the people? How do you kind of initiate that?
Basically, for me, I've always been very, very honest in the field about what I'm working on, but I have to say that the first step is always working with colleagues or translators or people who also want to help me with this, who really get what I'm doing, see that there's something, that there's an injustice here, or a story that needs to be told that's not being told correctly, that want to help me, that facilitate that access. So, whether or not in these specific weddings, there were people within these communities who were against child marriage because maybe it happened to them. That was the case in Nepal, where one of the he was a groom when he was in his teens, and now he was in his 20s working as a teacher in one of the villages. So I explained to him what I was doing, and I really had to know about the topic and know how many countries it happened in, and was really trying not to single out anybody, any one specific culture, and really tried to be a voice for the people in that culture who wanted change. And so I think if you can convince the people who are working closest with you, they can best represent your intentions and then help you move forward with your project.
I think you had the same kind of challenge with Dom's work and Ciudad Juarez, where you've also got the overlay of it can be a very dangerous place to work, and so it's difficult to go in and be there for long periods of time. And maybe Dom, you could address that a bit, how you go about that.
Right. So, I mean, it's pretty dangerous you can't just like go around and shoot pictures like openly. I mean, it's kind of getting a little bit better now, but especially last year, it was really hard to do that sort of thing. So you work you just use your head. You say, well, I want to do a story about kids, so how can I find some kids to shoot? So you work through a network of people, friends or colleagues or NGOs or whoever you can. But at the same time, for me, I think I have a little bit of an advantage. I mean, I'm a young person, so a lot of people that I'm photographing, they're not much younger than I am, and so I'm able to talk to them about that sort of thing and what it's like being a young person, and they're going through a lot of the same sort of things, that I was going through, a few years ago. So, and in that way, it's an advantage. I can connect pretty quickly. But at the same time, I think just having general respect for the people you're photographing and realizing that, you taking their photograph, they're letting you into their lives, and you should always respect that. And so I think if you open yourself to them as well, and you approach them, openly, that people respond to that.
I'm just going to agree with him. It's a collaboration. It's always a collaboration, and it's less about you than you think. So sometimes it's like, how empty and open can you be? Like, I don't think I've ever gone any place and the story was what I thought it was going to be. So it's as much openness as you can possibly bring to situations. So.
Question?
Thank you all for being here today. I guess my question is for everybody. In all of your cases, the crises that you're documenting are ongoing. So how do you know when your story is told, completely, and how do you know when you've answered all the questions that you sought to find the answer to? Thank you.
You don't, is a simple answer. Because history never ends. So, I guess in most of our projects, it's a transition. I can remember coming to this particular subject in 1994 and not being able to fathom that there is no forest left in the great island of Borneo or on Malay Peninsula. But no, the story really never ends. I'm going through this with the tsunami in Japan, and people talk, as we've said here, a number of us have said, some people helicopter in, pick out the sexy bits, if you will, the tremendous destruction. I live there. I care about it. I have family members in Japan, and people will say to me, the story's over, James, whatever. And the fact is, the story is never over, and there's always a human element to it. And it's the important thing, as Andre has said over and over again, is to humanize, because I know now intimately with Japan, but I knew it before, that we are all one disaster away from stepping over that threshold and being on the other side. And it's our jobs as photographers to, they're no different than us. That's the point, and that's what we try to communicate.
I agree with James. It's very difficult to know when to stop with the environmental issues that we both cover. I mean, they're ongoing, they're ever-changing. From a personal work point, I try to break the issues down into chapters, approach each one fairly logically, but in terms of picking a point when it stops, I think it's incredibly difficult. And I'm quite scared of not being able to find that point, to know when to stop. So, yeah, it's very difficult.
I find that some of my best work happens in the first day, maybe the first week, and then it's a downward spiral. And there's a point at which actually you can get too into a story. And I found myself in Israel, West Bank, Gaza. I made many trips over a few years, and I got to a point where everything that happened would make me angry. My blood would boil, and I realized I was too invested. So then I had to step away. And other people can come in and make more neutral work about. Not that I was taking a side. I was just too deep into the story.
Question?
Thank you very much, all of you, for coming. I was so heartened to hear so many of you speak as to the importance of the humanizing aspect, which is something I think is sorely lacking in mass media. My question relates to the actual logistics in terms of pitching and approaching publications and ensuring that they do justice to your vision, which, speaking as a journalist, I know can be very challenging.
When we started doing, the first time I went to Haiti, we had an assignment. And when we came back, the publication wasn't happy with what we brought back. They actually did want to know more about the death toll. And the journalist, I was very fortunate to work with two amazing journalists. She didn't do it. So you're going to pay my rent next month.
I think that issue and also the other issue, sometimes the story never ends, but sometimes you're done telling the story because there's no more money to tell it. And I think that I had, with these TV pictures, even after a couple years of working on it, there was like a 10-picture slideshow on a website, and I was flipping through. They were my pictures. I cared about the story, and I couldn't care to look at the pictures. It was just like sick person, sick person, sick person. It could be TB, it could be HIV, it could be anything, anywhere in the world. And sometimes what I found is sometimes, and I don't know if other people found the same thing, there's a few publications, print publications, that afford the space to properly tell the story visually. Often our pictures are used as illustrations for stories. And I think, as Stephanie talked about with the multimedia piece and like I tried to do with the website, I think more and more people are looking for other venues outside of traditional journalism and traditional print publications.
Just to follow that with just a practical question, I mean, all of you are basically freelancing. A number of you were at one point on staff with news organizations, and you chose to leave, to go out on your own. The question, this is something I think it's of interest, I'm sure, to the photojournalism students and to others here, is to, how do you support yourself? I mean, I know you don't pay the rent on Pulitzer Center grants alone. So what are the strategies for making a career and having ownership of it yourself, so that you're not doing it for an organization?
For one, I think it's really important to always maintain ownership of what you do, especially when you're investing a lot of time and your own money into these projects. You try to distribute your work through publications, and a lot of times they try to take the rights of your pictures and try to sell them and do all these things, and that's super important that you never let people do that. At the same time, it helps if you live like in Mexico and you're getting paid in dollars, so things like that. But also, I think looking at these projects, instead of thinking, okay, I want to do this story or this assignment for this magazine, instead thinking, I want to do this project, and then looking at, okay, how can I find money to fund this project, and then thinking about, traditional media is just like another distribution platform that you have, and so there's money that comes from that, and then maybe later you do a book, or maybe later you sell prints, and then all these little things they start piecing together. You get a grant or whatever, and it pieces together an income, and you can't do that if you don't own your work. If you're not retaining control of your work.
This can be challenging because kind of things did shift after 2008. Personally, I live in Japan. I traditionally would, as he said, I'd do a project, produce a story, write a little bit about it as well, and offer it as a complete story to European magazines. The European market, particularly in Italy, tends to like to buy stories. That's what I like to do. I prefer that to assignments. I like total control if I can have it. But as I mentioned with the biofuel, I usually try to find something that I'm really passionate about, and then I ask myself, how is this going to be interesting to people in other places of the world? Why should it matter to us? Why should they matter to us? They matter to me. That's why I'm doing the story. But how can I frame it in a way to show the correlation or cause and effect? And this can help you as a photographer to help people relate to it in places far away from the subject.
For me, the Pulitzer grants have allowed me to really focus on subjects which I want to focus on. When I first applied, there were no editors who were sending me out to do this story about desertification in China. It's not exactly a glamorous subject. They weren't going to send me for very long. So I just found a way through the Pulitzer Center to be able to go out and dedicate time to this. I think we all take on various editorial assignments day to day, the bread and butter, the odd corporate assignment. But the key is to find a way that you can work on the stuff that you really care about, whether that's through grants or through saving money through other jobs. You've just got to be able to concentrate and find a way to do that work that you really want to do.
Why don't we take these three questions? Maybe we'll just take them all and then get the photographers to respond, and then we'll continue the conversation across the street. So we'll just do all three. Your questions.
Okay, I just wanted to hear real professionals talk about this, and I'd seen this in a movie about photography. So like media about media, but I wanted to ask, how do you separate yourself from the situation that you're trying to document? And for example, I don't know do you help the people that you photograph, for example, take the picture and then immediately help, or how do you control yourself from, separate yourself from the situation, focus on just photographing rather than being more part of the experience or helping out with the people you're documenting? If that makes sense.
I mean, for me, it's tricky because, for all of us, we have to be very close to people. So for me, it's almost like there's a circle that you have to kind of enter to be with people. But there's also some detachment, right? So I feel like it's something you have to navigate, a little balance you have to navigate. So it's like being open with people so they understand a little bit about who you are, and honestly, with transparency, why you're there. But also you have to be removed so that you can actually witness what they're going through. So I think it's a tricky thing that you have to get comfortable at, actually.
This is something that, Stephanie, you've dealt with the people you photographed.
Yeah, it's very complicated, but for me, I've always decided that I'm a human first. So if there's ever a situation that I feel like I can significantly do something and someone wants me to do it, then I've definitely tried to do that. But at the same time, there are certain situations that for cultural reasons and for, trust reasons that I was invited into a certain situation that if I went and told the authorities afterwards, it could cause like a huge problem in that community and stuff. So those are situations where I'm not welcome to step in. They don't want me to do that. And so you just have to, I've had to reassure myself that I'm there for a purpose, and if I can keep it together and do a good job, then hopefully those photographs and those images will do more than what I could have done in this one situation. And you have to, that's a tough line for some people, to navigate, like if you feel comfortable with that or not. But I really go on the how much the people I'm working with in that community, what they feel is the right thing to do.
These last two questions?
One of you mentioned earlier that once you go into a place, you find out that the story is very much different than what you originally thought it would be. And obviously, since you're all investing massive amounts of time in this, you've done some background research and you have some level of personal investment. But I guess I was just wondering how true that was for the rest of you in terms of once you know these people and you hear their very personal, intimate stories, how you feel that sort of affected what your preconceptions were of the project going into it.
Yeah, well, you just have to be open and counterpunch, I guess. Sometimes the story is better than you had hoped expected it to be. So it's always important to be open to the story is what it is. So it's not our job to do propaganda and create the story we want. We create the story that is.
Last question.
Many of you have worked in conflict or crises areas. How do you maintain security without compromising on the voice of the story that you wish to present?
I think there's a lot of kind of rules that you give yourself that seem like practical sense, but they're important for you to remember. You don't give yourself a routine. You don't go to the same places. You never tell people, for example, if you're going to go to a community that's dangerous, you never say, "Hey, I'm going to be there at 5 o'clock." You just show up and you go from there. I've worked in a few situations, but because the client wanted to. I worked once with a security person, and that was kind of interesting. But I don't like that. I like to work. You go in a beat-up car, and you keep a low profile, and you do your best to just sort of navigate the system. But also in my, working where I work, because it is really dangerous as a journalist, and they do kill journalists. It's important to go through the networks of your friends and relationships that you have. So if you want to photograph some particular thing, it could be whatever, a basketball game, you would say, well, I need to shoot a basketball game. You can't just go drive around and look for a basketball game. So you say, well, you call your buddy and you say, hey, do you know of any basketball games that are going on? Or do you have somebody that likes to play basketball that we could call? And it's just, it's common sense, but it's really important that you follow those rules for yourself.
Yeah, I would say the same. Obviously, the biofuel does not qualify as a dangerous story. But in cases, if I've been in Yemen or Kashmir, Afghanistan, he's right. Never the same routine all the time. Sometimes I'll wear a turban. At 70 miles an hour in a local car, they can't distinguish what nationality you are. Local transportation. Be quiet about your plans. When you're done, get out. Work quickly and get out. So these are things. Be quiet about it. Yeah.
Good. Well, we want to continue this conversation across the street, and I hope you'll help us get the photographers over there as fast as we can, so that all of us can talk. So that all of us can talk about these subjects as we're watching these projections. I hope the projector is working and that it's up against the auditorium. I want to thank, before you leave, I want to thank all of my colleagues at the Pulitzer Center for all the work they've done in putting this together, and especially Jake Naughton, who's back in the back and asked the first question. Jake is our visual media coordinator, and he curated this show that if you haven't seen, you really should go down to the Old Borders and see it. It's a fabulous show. He also oversaw the logistics of getting all of these folks here and organizing this event. So thank you, Jake, and thanks to everybody else at the Pulitzer Center. And thank you. We wouldn't be able to do the work that we do without the really brilliant journalism and photography that we've heard discussed tonight. So thank you all for all the work you do.